In this city, there are countless places that people flock to for raucous parties and dazzling success. Yet only the chosen few know of the existence of a secret club where the highest echelons of society gather behind doors of dark red wood. It is a place attended by those who, it would seem, have already achieved everything one could ever dream of. Billionaires, renowned politicians, art collectors, and legends of world cinema. Yet the purpose of their meetings is not merely casual small talk. For in this club, where no one goes by name and everyone hides behind a mask of status, deals are struck that have the power to determine the fate of nations, peoples, and entire continents. When Angelina Jolie was handed an envelope containing a lavish invitation, she initially thought it was a joke. The dark silk envelope with golden embossing seemed to belong to another era. Inside, she found a brief note written in neat, almost calligraphic handwriting. Come and discover the true face of power. There were no names, no signature. Her curiosity was piqued, for in her years of career and charitable work, she had seen much, but the idea of a private gathering, where global issues were supposedly resolved, intrigued her so much that she decided to go and see everything for herself. The night before the visit passed in contemplation, as Angelina sat by the fireplace, watching the flickering flames and recalling the faces of people she had once helped. Why had she been invited in particular? What might await her in this mysterious club? And was it worth risking her reputation by showing up there? Yet curiosity and the desire to make a difference in the world proved stronger than her doubts. When evening came, the actress, dressed in an elegant yet understated black dress, left her home determined to uncover what lay behind this enigmatic message. With her first steps along the deserted street, lit only by yellow streetlights, she felt a slight anxiety mixed with anticipation. The urban noise subsided as her car approached the majestic building, surrounded by a high fence. For it was there, behind massive gates, that the secret club was located. And at that moment, Angelina did not yet know how deep the waters would be in which she had decided to immerse herself. The meeting place turned out to be far more luxurious than one could imagine, with tall columns of black marble, floors laid out in an intricate pattern of golden stone, and the soft glow of numerous chandeliers creating the impression that the guest had entered another world, a world where history, power, and beauty intertwined as one. In the spacious foyer, Angelina was greeted by a silent butler, who merely nodded, inviting her to follow him as if he had known of her arrival in advance. In the main hall, the guests were already seated. It seemed that they all knew each other well, with no cheerful greetings, only penetrating stares that conveyed judgment and cold curiosity. When Angelina entered, the conversations died down, and each person present fixed their gaze upon her as if trying to guess what had brought the famous actress into their exclusive circle. They nodded in polite greeting, yet no one smiled. One of the guests, a middle-aged man in an expensive tuxedo, was the first to break the silence. "Miss Jolie, have you truly decided to come? Are you hoping that your charitable initiatives will find support here?" His voice carried a slight mockery. Angelina responded with only a brief nod, maintaining an impassive expression, while inside she felt a growing tension, as if she had found herself in a den of beasts where everyone regarded her with suspicion. There was no room here for open expressions of sympathy, and any charitable work appeared merely as a cover for a subtle game of influence. Suppressing her unease, Angelina tried to take in her surroundings. She noticed paintings on the walls depicting historical scenes, military parades, royal courts, and the triumphs of conquerors, all reflecting a thirst for power that, by all accounts, reigned among the guests as well. The air was filled with a strange feeling, as if each of them had built around themselves an invisible wall of money and connections, trying to show that they were beyond ordinary human emotions. The guests were seated at a long, dark wooden table, adorned with elegant carvings along its edges, and as Angelina took her seat, she felt a slight trembling in her fingertips. Not from fear, but from the realization that she was about to confront people whose views of the world might be very different from her own. Next to her sat an elderly man with piercing yet warm eyes, who introduced himself as Edward, a collector of rare books and, with a smile, an explorer of human souls. His demeanor was unlike the others, for there was no arrogance in his eyes. When the conversation at the table turned to global issues, conflicts in various countries, and how to profit from them, Edward leaned toward Angelina and whispered, "It is not customary here to speak of the heart, only of calculations and profit. But I have heard about your projects, and I know that for you, these are not empty words. At that very moment, the loud tap of a cane on the marble floor resounded in the hall, heralding the start of the official part of the meeting. All eyes turned to the figure at the center of the room, a tall man with sharp features and a cold gaze. His name was William Brayson. Rumors had it that he was a billionaire who owned the largest corporations in several countries and had close ties with those who made political decisions. He spoke of the need for joint efforts to resolve global crises, yet his tone betrayed a desire to place himself above everyone else. Today we will discuss real ways to make the world safer, he proclaimed, of course with the right investments. These words sounded promising, yet Angelina detected in them the same false aftertaste as in the invitation. It became clear to her that beneath the guise of noble intentions lay something far more self-serving. The meeting began with speeches by several influential figures who talked about projects related to sustainable development, social programs, and even environmental safety. But all these speeches seemed remarkably similar, as if composed from the same template. There was no genuine concern for the fate of people, not a trace of sympathy for those suffering from poverty or war, only dry financial calculations, forecasts of profit that were meant to justify the investments. Angelina, accustomed to a variety of audiences, listened attentively, trying to grasp what lay beneath these words. Yet every mention of good deeds turned into a long list of economic benefits and opportunities to manipulate public opinion. "Do you not see," one of the speakers addressed the room, "that by investing in the poor, we gain access to their markets and political sympathies? This is a foolproof plan." The actress felt a wave of indignation rising within her. She recalled her trips to regions where children suffered from malnutrition, hospitals that lacked medicine, and people who fought for their lives every day without even a chance to attract the attention of such investors. In her eyes, there was clear outrage, yet she decided not to engage in open debate at that moment. During the break, Edward approached her and, lowering his voice, said, "I see that this has affected you, but be careful. Many here use provocations as a tool. If you respond too sharply, they will take it as a challenge and try to break you." There was genuine concern in his words, and Angelina realized that perhaps he was her only ally in this hall. She nodded appreciatively, trying to quell the inner fire of righteous anger. After a short break, William Brayson announced an open discussion, during which anyone could ask a question to any present member. The guests resettled, and unexpectedly the spotlight fell on Angelina, who was invited to step forward and felt as if she were on stage with critics lurking behind the scenes, ready to tear apart any vulnerability. The first question came sharply and mockingly. "Miss Jolie, you are, of course, a famous actress. Your fees run into millions. Do you not find it hypocritical to preach the ideals of humanism while living in luxury that most people have never even dreamed of?" A quiet laugh rippled through the hall, and many looked at Angelina with interest, awaiting her reaction. She straightened up and answered in a confident voice, "I have never denied that I possess considerable resources, but precisely because of that, I consider it my duty to use them to help those deprived of even the most basic necessities. For me, charity is not PR, but a way to give back to the world a part of what it has given me." A tense pause followed. Some guests exchanged looks, unsure how to respond to her words. Then Brayson rose from his seat and retorted, "Beautifully said, Miss Jolie, but do you not understand that the world is ruled by money and power? No matter how much you invest in these noble deeds, there will always be those who deem it a waste of funds." Angelina fixed him with a steady look and replied, "Money is merely a tool, nothing more. True power lies in changing someone's life for the better. I have seen children who had no future, and now they study, build careers, and help others. Is that not real strength?" Her words rang convincingly, and a tense silence fell over the room, as if no one had expected to hear such assurance from an actress whom many here considered just another star, eager to elevate her status. After such an honest exchange of views, the intensity of the discussion noticeably increased. Those who supported the view that money rules everything seemed to rally around Brayson, while those who were ambivalent began to regard Angelina with renewed interest, as if two poles had emerged in the room, ready to engage in an ideological clash. Someone in the audience dared to make even harsher statements. "The history of mankind is the history of the struggle for power. The strong always prevail, and the weak become nothing more than resources. Why should we waste time and money on those who cannot take care of themselves? Angelina clenched her fists upon hearing this. She remembered the faces of women and children in refugee camps, recalled their fear and hope that someone would come to help. Noticing the whiteness of her knuckles, Edward quietly murmured, "Do not give up. If you do not speak the truth now, who will?" Gathering her courage, the actress began to speak about her trips to the poorest regions of the planet, about how people, deprived of even the most basic comforts, struggle for every morsel of bread. She recounted how she had seen billionaires and politicians who promised help but forgot their words as soon as they left. "I am here because I believe that among you there are people capable of remembering your best qualities," she concluded. Some listeners averted their gaze, others turned away with a disdainful smile, yet the air clearly shifted. Either a seed of doubt had been planted in someone's heart, or this bold speech reminded those present that there is more in this world than cold calculation. Perhaps in this club, where discussions usually revolved solely around power and profit, a spark had been ignited that could lead to real change. At that moment, someone abruptly moved a chair, and a tense pause fell over the hall, as if heralding a new twist of events. But before it could fully unfold, another brief break was announced to discuss the further agenda, and Angelina understood that the most challenging part was still ahead. When the break was announced, the hall slowly began to empty. Guests seemed eager to disperse into side corridors to discuss what they had heard, in a more intimate circle, or over a glass of expensive champagne, while the atmosphere remained tense. Many expressed discontent in their glances, and others, on the contrary, showed interest in the positions voiced by Angelina. She decided to step out onto the terrace to catch her breath. There, behind a massive glass door, a view opened onto a well-maintained garden, with neatly trimmed bushes and white marble sculptures, as if the garden served as a kind of refuge from the stifling world of arrogance reigning in the hall. On the terrace, William Brayson was already standing, leaning on his cane and casting a cold gaze into the distance. Seeing Angelina, he turned, slightly raising his eyebrow. "And yet you do not back down. I see determination in your eyes, but tell me, what is the use of your humanism if you cannot change the opinions of those who run the world?" She stepped closer, trying not to show irritation. "Perhaps I cannot convince everyone," she replied, "but if even one person reconsiders their views and decides to help others, that is already a victory." William smirked, and for a moment something resembling doubt flashed in his eyes. He seemed about to say something even more cutting, but restrained himself and, stepping back into the shadow of a column, let Angelina pass ahead. For a moment, it appeared to her that behind his cold demeanor lay hidden pain, some inner struggle. But she did not have time to learn more as footsteps were heard behind her, and Edward joined them, saying quietly, "I hope you haven't forgotten about the upcoming discussion. After the break, a more exclusive circle will gather, and I assure you, that is when the most interesting part will begin." It turned out that the main part of the meeting was intended for only a few. Angelina was led into a separate room, where a long table was laden with folders containing documents, charts, and reports. The lighting here was softer than in the main hall, and the walls were adorned with portraits of individuals clearly belonging to historic aristocratic families or old entrepreneurial dynasties. About 10 people gathered at the table, including, of course, William Brayson, and next to him several politicians and businessmen whose faces Angelina vaguely recognized from newspaper headlines. Edward sat a little apart, seemingly preferring the position of an observer rather than an active participant. "So, gentlemen," Brayson began, slowly shifting his gaze from one person to another, "we all understand that our world needs reforms. The question is, who and how will implement them?" He gestured for everyone to speak, and the first to talk was a man in a strict gray suit, apparently a major investor or banker. Lately, there have been increasing ideas about social responsibility and other humanitarian programs. But let's face it, investments must pay off. If we spend millions helping the underprivileged, where is our profit? Angelina listened to his words and felt a rising indignation inside her. However, she realized that an open debate at that moment would only heighten the tension, so it was better to let them speak to the end and then present her counter-arguments. When it was her turn, all eyes turned to the actress. It seemed that everyone expected either a pompous speech or inappropriate sentimentality, but Angelina decided to speak about real issues. "You talk about profit. I speak of people's lives," she began calmly. "Remember how many wars are being waged on this planet? How many refugees wander without shelter? Helping them does not mean throwing money away. It is an investment in the stability of the future, for when we prevent people from dying of hunger, we create a peaceful society in which your business can also prosper." Some listeners gave a crooked smile, while others leaned back in their chairs as if they had heard childish babble. Yet Edward nodded in approval, and even Brayson did not interrupt, although a sense of distrust seemed to permeate his demeanor, as if he were waiting for the right moment to deliver a decisive blow in the debate. The rising tension broke when one of the politicians, a middle-aged man with evident oratorical skill, addressed Angelina with refined politeness. "Miss Jolie, allow me to ask, you so often mention the fates of people you have encountered in your charitable work. Do you not think that all this is merely a drop in the ocean? Millions suffer, and one person cannot change the world. Is that not naive?" She understood that contempt lay behind his words, but decided to answer as sincerely as possible. "It is true that millions suffer, but sometimes, to spark a chain reaction, it is enough to help just one person. I am not saying I have saved the entire world, but when you see a person, once given a chance by you, stand on their own feet and begin to help others, you realize that goodness spreads faster than we think." At that moment, Edward interjected as if to support her thought. "I once believed that a single individual could not influence global processes, but one incident changed my mind. I met a young man who lived in an underprivileged area, and everyone thought his future was predetermined. However, he found the strength to enter university, pursue research in medicine, and even open a small clinic for the poor. And do you know who paid for his education? A friend of mine, a millionaire, who decided that he would help at least one person. In the end, that young man saved hundreds of lives." Edward's words hung in the air for a moment, and some of the listeners averted their gaze to hide a skeptical smile, yet Angelina sensed that among those present there were individuals who had begun to truly reflect. Meanwhile, William Brayson rose and walked along the table, tapping his cane on the floor. He clearly did not intend to merely listen to others' stories. His gaze was focused and almost predatory. "All these stories are beautiful," he said as he stopped by the fireplace, "but we are here to discuss real steps. How, Miss Jolie, do you think we can change the world when many of those present are directly interested in the continuation of conflicts and crises?" A resounding silence fell over the room. Several people cast angry looks at Brayson as if they did not expect him to voice what is usually only spoken behind the scenes. But he continued, "The secret is not that we all supposedly want good, but that crises provide opportunities for profit. That is why none of us truly wishes to eliminate the root causes of poverty and wars." Angelina felt a chill run down her spine. On one hand, Brayson had openly acknowledged the cynical truth about how the world of big money and politics operates. Yet on the other, his words sounded like a challenge directed at the very idea of humanism. She replied calmly, though internally she was seething. "If that is true, then why do you not try to change this system? Why continue with something that brings so much pain and destruction?" Brayson merely smirked. "Because it gives us power, and power, Miss Jolie, is the most valuable thing we have." The session had been going on for several hours, and the tension had reached its peak. It seemed that opinions had finally split into two camps. One, believing that the world should be ruled by the strong, while the weak are merely expendable, and the other still searching for compromise, justifying their stance by claiming that it is better to help selectively than not help at all. Angelina stood her ground. "Either we strive for genuine good, or it is all just an empty game of charity." Suddenly, one of the most silent guests, a man in an expensive suit who had so far kept to himself, asked to speak. His name was Raphael Kim, and, according to rumors, he owned a network of private clinics in various countries. Until that moment, he had listened attentively, hardly joining the conversation. "I have thought long about what you are debating here," he said in a quiet but firm voice. "And I would like to share a story that might change your view on the matter of whether to help or not to help." Raphael paused briefly, as if gathering his thoughts, then continued. "Several years ago, I lost my son. He died from a rare disease that, at that time, received insufficient attention. There were no medicines available, and research was too costly. I pleaded for help from large pharmaceutical companies, but they all replied that it was not profitable. The demand was too small. The market would not cover the expenses. Clenching his hands in an effort to remain calm, he said, "Then I realized that, to many, human life is nothing more than a statistic, and I decided that if I had the resources, I would spend them to save as many children as possible. That is how my clinics came into being, where we work on medicines for rare diseases. And yes, it does not yield enormous profit, but I see the smiles of parents leaving our doors, knowing that their child will live." A complete silence fell over the room. Raphael's words were strikingly different from the dry financial statements previously heard, and even Brayson lowered his gaze for a moment. Perhaps for the first time that evening, many of those present felt real pain and understood that their games in charities pale in comparison to genuine tragedy. "Forgive me for bringing this up," Raphael concluded, "but perhaps this will make you reconsider the choices you make when you place profit above life." Angelina felt tears welling in her eyes, yet she held back, understanding that she had to speak. She rose and scanned everyone in the room, saying, "This is why I am here, to ensure that at least one person hears that we cannot continue to live as if money were the only thing that matters. True strength is not in profiting from the suffering of others, but in changing someone's life for the better, in giving hope where it has long since vanished." A long pause followed, and then one of the businessmen, who had previously sneered contemptuously, suddenly said, I never thought of it this way. I always believed that charity was merely a means to cleanse one's conscience or improve one's reputation. But Mr. Kim's story—" He fell silent, leaving it clear that within him a battle had begun between an old worldview and new feelings. William Brayson, it seemed, wanted to object but found no suitable words. He nervously tapped his cane on the floor, ran a hand through his hair, and casting a glance at Angelina, said, "You know how to touch the heart, Miss Jolie. However, I am not sure that everyone here is ready for change." The actress responded with a slight nod. "I do not expect that you will all abandon your habits and business strategies in an instant, but perhaps today someone among you will remember hiding their humanity behind walls of gold and power." At the club's gate, a driver was already waiting for Angelina. As she got into the car, she glanced back and saw a dim light in one of the windows. Behind the curtain, a figure loomed, perhaps Brayson or someone from his entourage. And at that moment, she felt a strange mix of sorrow at the realization of how much pain and cynicism existed in the world, and a faint yet palpable hope. The car started moving, and the club faded away, dissolving into the night's haze. Inside, Angelina heard a quiet voice saying, "Do not give up." She remembered Raphael Kim's words, the man who lost his son and turned his tragedy into a cause to help others, and recalled the stories of people whose lives were saved through charity, as well as those cold stares that might someday soften if humanity were to awaken. The next day, as the sun illuminated the city and the world resumed its usual hustle, Angelina was already in her studio reviewing documents related to her humanitarian projects. But now she felt even more determined. The evening at the secret club had shown her that cynicism, though a powerful weapon, also has vulnerable spots, real human stories, genuine emotions, grief, and compassion that cannot be measured in money. She envisioned someone who had listened to her speech, looking into the eyes of a child in need, and realizing that not everything in this world is meant to bring profit. Perhaps it is through such small steps that real change is born, a gradual journey toward a better future. And now, as I, the narrator of this story, conclude my account, I wish to emphasize the most important point. True power lies not in wealth and authority, but in the ability to bring light into places shrouded in darkness. Sometimes, all it takes is one word, one kind act, or one person who dares to stand against the cynical rules of the game. For when we choose compassion and mercy, we give the world a chance to change, step by step, soul by soul. Yes, cynicism is strong, and many continue to believe that money rules everything. But in this story, in the secret club among those accustomed to thinking in terms of profit and influence, there were those ready to open their hearts to compassion. And though they may be few, they are precisely the ones who can spark great change. So let this story serve as a reminder to each of us that true authority is not the ability to command and control, but the skill to hear another's pain and extend a helping hand. And if we can preserve that spark of humanity within us, our world will undoubtedly become a better place, no matter the obstacles.